All right, everybody. We're going to be starting our next Perceptive podcast cast now here on the Game Wisdom channel. I'm, of course, Josh Placer, and we have another great discussion about design for you tonight. My guest is a longtime guest that we've spoken to many times in the past. I think this is the first time we're doing it live here, but he is, of course, the owner of Zachtronics, who is known for games such as Infinite Factory, Space Chem, Shenzhen, and his recently released games Mobius Front and Nerds, which hopefully I didn't butcher that too badly. But please welcome to the cast, Zach Barth. How
Hello.
are you doing?
Good. Ready to talk about some games. I've got chat open too, so I can see everybody in chat saying hello.
Mm-hmm.
So, hello, people.
All right, but it is great to have you back on. It's been, excuse me. I think the last time we spoke was at least like a year or two ago. It's been quite an interesting time. I think the last time we spoke was like right around the time of either, I think a little bit after Shenzhen or the more story-driven game that you released.
Eliza?
Yeah, that one.
We haven't talked in a while. I haven't done a lot of podcasts in the past couple of years. I think you mentioned that when we were emailing. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's been a while. We made a bunch of games.
So, since this is your first time you're on, like, for one of these live discussions, for people watching who don't know who you are, could you give, like, kind of a quick, who you are, what is Zachtronics kind of thing?
Yeah, I run a small game studio called Zachtronics. We've been around for our first commercial game, Space Chem, came out I think like at the very beginning of 20 like January 1st at midnight in 2011. So it's been like 10 years. And I made games before that. I made some like free flash games and stuff. I made Infiniminer, which is the game that sort of directly or indirectly inspired Minecraft. That was all like before our commercial studio works. Um, and yeah, we've made about like a game a year since 2011, and a lot of them are about programming. Some of them are explicitly about programming, like you have to type code in. I don't want to say we like started that genre, but I think we've definitely taken some big steps towards popularizing games about like like proper games on Steam about programming. Um, and we've made games that are sort of not about programming, but are maybe secretly about programming, like Infinite Factory, which looks like you're building a factory out of blocks, but maybe it's kind of like programming, stuff like that. We've done a couple like kind of tacticsy war games. Um, None of them have done as well as our programming games, which is kind of weird. We did a visual novel game a couple years ago, like 2 years ago. That's very like realistic and about therapy and tech companies. And then we just recently released a free multiplayer solitaire game called Nerds Online. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I see you, 10 dot. I'm looking right at chat.
Yeah, and your games have definitely like become like their own like subgenre in terms of puzzle design. Like, I see sometimes developers just reference, I'm just gonna make a Zach like game
Yeah,
for my next title.
as that is sort of the official title. Like there, I don't know if they, I don't know if there is a Zach like tag on Steam, but I definitely had like one of our account reps at Valve email me about that and how we felt about that. It's yeah, like that's kind of one of the names for them are Zach likes. Um, which is what I called my game design book because it's about me and I feel like I'm pretty Zach like. So yeah.
So, and also for the chat, I should write my first book on Josh likes. I should start there and then work my way up. Sorry. But for the chat, if you do have any questions for Zach regarding any of his games, puzzle design, Mobius, whatever, definitely feel free to leave them in the comments and we'll get to them as they show up. So, I guess my first question, I know we probably talked about this, I think, probably one of our first casts together. But for people who are watching us, I would just want to ask you, like, if you had to kind of like nail down like your style of puzzle designs, like how a puzzle in Infinite Factory or Space Chem, or even something like with Shenzhen or TIS, like, how would you describe like, I guess, the methodology of your puzzles?
Yeah, a lot of times they're very open-ended. Like I'll just create I mean, like, in some ways they're not puzzles, right? Like, because maybe the definition of a puzzle is that it's like a designer constructs something and then carefully removes pieces so that you have to reconstruct what they constructed, and like you sort of walk through their shoes of what they intended as you solve it. And like that's not really what our puzzles are like at all. I just sort of make challenges that seem plausible. They're kind of more like homework in that regard, that it's just like, here's a thing for you to do to practice some sort of skills. In our games the skills are made up, but like you solve it your way, right? And this has like an interesting side effect that you can often solve the puzzles, and if a puzzle is open-ended, you can solve a bunch of different ways. Some solutions are, according to certain arbitrary metrics, better than others, and so it turns into a game that's not just about solving puzzles but also optimizing solutions to it. And so that is like that is often the case in a lot of our puzzle games, is that they're sort of optimizable. And you can kind of see other puzzle games try to experiment with this, like with sometimes they'll put histograms in, but like you can't really, like, I guess like some games have like speed running, right? Like you can speed run Portal, but like I think Portal 2 actually, I don't know if they kept them, but they had histograms for their like number of steps taken and number of portals shot. But like that's not really what those games are about. Like the fact that it has like this performance aspect, like speed running is all about like a performance of going through actions and not messing up. And like, I don't know, just like most puzzle games, they sort of lack that quality that allows them to be optimizable, and so that I think that's probably one of like the more defining characteristics of our puzzle games. A lot of them are also really hard. I don't really know why. Just stuff that seems like a reasonable thing to me ends up being hard to people. I think a lot of our games are sort of about maybe fundamentally misunderstanding like the people who play them. But then like sometimes we get lucky and people like they accidentally align with people. I don't really know. I was thinking about this earlier today, just that like we just make weird games and we sort of have gotten lucky. Oh, because I was looking at like all your podcast episodes, and it's like how to make a modern, like how to make a modern retro RPG, which like aside from like the sort of irony of a title like that, but like like a lot of games, like it feels like people are trying to sort of like make things that work or are good, or I don't know, we just make games, and some of them turn out to be interesting, but it's kind of hard to pin down. I don't know.
Yeah, it is such a very weird more. We were just having this conversation last night about we do you remember when we do like the developer roundtables? We've been switching them over to being live. So we just did our latest one yesterday, and we spoke about kind of the evolution of genres over the last decade, and how certain genres seem to have grown while other ones just kind of like either died or they just like quietly disappeared. And like the Avenger genre was one that we kind of brought up a lot, but like puzzle design has been very fascinating because I think puzzle gameplay has really grown in very unique directions over the past decade. Like not just with your titles, but stuff like Baba's You. I saw Curious Expedition, Filament. Like it feels like we're seeing more developers kind of, I think, try and elevate this idea of doing more with a puzzle game than just as saying, here's 500 screens of puzzles. Just do them all in order, and then you win shows up on the screen.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a common trend in games just in general, right? That like the idea of games with distinct levels and like being able to select your level, is kind of going away, just in all genres.
Yeah, definitely, and we're seeing, I think, and again, like this goes back to that conversation we had, that we're seeing this more of a blurring of genres with a lot of these games. Like as you did with Eliza, that was more of like kind of like a visual novel experience with kind of like your puzzle, or I think very light puzzle solving. And or was that, did I have puzzle solving? I think that's the one game of yours I missed.
It's just talking.
Okay.
There's a solitaire game in it that's quite challenging, but
Yeah.
that's sort of extraneous. Yeah, I think I'll let you know a secret. There's no such thing as genres.
Dun, dun,
They're
dun.
like they're labels applied to people as a sort of like post hoc analysis of why things were successful in like a space that's fundamentally impossible to analyze, like why anything is successful, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's animal spirits, you know, it's the invisible hand. Like people just like things, and it's
Yeah.
impossible to predict. Like Among Us is like a crazy example of like this is a game that was around for years and no one cared, and then all of a sudden people cared, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a big deal. And it's like how you're not going to have some biz dev person with like a slide deck like predicting that that's going to happen, right? It's I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that stuff is people just trying to like after the fact describe and put names to like trends and
Mm-hmm.
emergent social like phenomena of games and
Yeah.
any kind of media really.
Yeah, and again, like it's always interesting when we have these discussions about game design because there's so much about I think a lot of consumers don't necessarily understand,
I think
and
a lot of game designers don't understand.
that is true as well. Nobody understands game design. That's the secret of game design, everybody.
Yeah.
We had a few questions show up. Electro asked, "How was the design process for Mobius different from other games, if it was different at all?"
Well, we kind of did our same thing. I mean, we I think for the past couple games we'd been on sort of like a little bit of a realism kick. And so not that our games are realistic, but just that we would take something that's real and then try to make a game about that evokes the parts of it that we think are interesting. Obviously Opus Magnum doesn't count because that's not real, but like Shenzhen IO is inspired by, both in story and in the mechanics. It's inspired by real things that are happening in the world and like things that people are building and the ways that they build stuff and the attitudes they have towards building stuff and the tools they use to build stuff. Um, Eliza is deeply grounded in real stuff that's happening, sometimes too real.
Mm-hmm.
Mobius Front was grounded in like the military hardware and the doctrine sort of as it was written in like of the 80s and like the sort of like Cold War, like, US versus the rest of the world doctrine. Um, it's just sort of like it's in that space. I think one of the things with Mobius Front was that we tried to take primary source materials, like manuals, like soldiering handbooks from the era, and then like take them really literally. And so like the thing a smart person would do if they were trying to make like an actual realistic game would be to look at more stuff of like meta analysis kind of things, like people who are smart and understand the area and then reviewed the things that were written in the time period. But for Mobius Front we just went straight to the stuff like the flawed documents from the time period and just sort of like kind of chowed down on all of this material that was written by somewhere in between like propaganda and like just optimistic optimistic instructions to young soldiers of like, oh yeah, do this will definitely work, like never mind the fact that like the if you read people's account, like I mean a great example is like the dragon that enthusiastically say, oh, this is great, this is how you use it. And so there's like an interesting contrast there. So we sort of went for like like the Disneyland version of it all, which you get from going straight to the primary military manuals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the things that's kind of interesting about that era is that there weren't many wars in the 80s, and so a lot of people's understanding of it is sort of just like theory crafting about something that never really went down,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of an interesting period. I don't know. It kind of gives you like it's a little more open to interpretation in some ways too. But it's just like, oh, how could you say that our game is unrealistic? There weren't any wars like this, certainly against like a parallel universe, alternate universe American army that saw different situations. So it kind of gave us, it allowed us to kind of detach from reality a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
still make something that was kind of technical and grounded in things. So it's like we want to be able to kind of be inspired by real things, but we want to be able to have some freedoms with it. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where like a lot of our stuff has gone lately, and that's kind of part of the process. Like the specific design process for Mobius Front was to look at the material and try to figure out like, okay, what's like what are some gameplay dynamics that seem like they would be interesting and fun and evoke the material we're trying to capture. And I think this might be very different from how other people make games. I'm sort of starting to think that maybe more people make games by like looking at games that they like and then seeing like what do we like about that game and how do we add to it with stuff that we came up with or liked from other games. And so we really do start from scratch. Like we take like little bits and pieces, like what are things we've seen in games that worked, but we're always trying to build something new. And I think that's what sometimes makes us lucky and usually just gets us in trouble.
Yeah, and of course, like the whole like the manual and like that kind of like having that physical guide has become like a staple of your games. I know a lot of people just love to like print that out. I think didn't you sell like a few like hardcover or like fancier versions of some of your books on your
Yeah.
site?
So so our three games that are about typing have like manuals that you read. And the reason why somebody emailed me about this today is that it's it seems really unpleasant to learn about like the syntax of a programming language from an in-game tutorial, because as soon as you get out of the tutorial you're going to forget what the syntax was. And so for something that is a written programming language, you kind of need a written reference.
Mm-hmm.
For Infinifactory, you don't. Like there is no need
Yeah.
for a manual in Infinifactory. You spatially and visually know what the things do. But for our three like explicit programming games, they have manuals because I really can't think of like a better way to do it. So none of our other games have manuals, right? Like there's some PDF manuals that are included with Mobius Front, but it's because they were created by the government, so they are copyright free, and it seemed like an interesting way to kind of share the visual and like informational references that we use to make the games. Specifically, like one of them is like a little document, like a little educational document about like Soviet ATGMs, and I thought it was actually a really good introduction to the concept of anti-tank missiles, which seem crazy overpowered in our game, but maybe it's like justifiable based on like people's reading of the material at the time. So it just seemed like an interesting way to, I mean, not really to explain it because I don't really expect people to read it, but you know, it just kind of, I don't know, like it was the level at which we were engaging with the material, so it seemed appropriate to include it with the game. So that's, yeah.
Got a few more questions. I do want to spend a little bit more time on Mobius Front from a design perspective. We'll get to that probably later on in this cast. One asks, do you spend a lot of time playing games yourself? Since I imagine making your games eat up a lot of your time.
No. And I think it's starting to show in our games actually, but I no, I don't really play games that much anymore. I don't really like them. Um, they just doesn't, they don't have the same magic that they used to. I don't know. It's hard. It's really been like over the last 10 years, there's just sort of been a slow death of like my appreciation, like genuine appreciation for games. I used to get really excited about playing them, and I remember like when Fallout 3 came out and StarCraft 2, I was like excited. You know, I waited in line at PAX in 2008 to play StarCraft 2 and like put on the gross headset, like the headphones that were like I put on headphones that touched other people's heads, which now seems unthinkable to me, to play the demo of StarCraft 2. And I was like, "Oh, this is great. This is awesome." And I cannot sympathize with that person anymore that I used to be, because I just don't care. You know, and it's like I play games. I actually kind of amusingly, somebody asked also like what war games do I like? I really never played any war games because I didn't understand them. They just throw all these units at you, and you're just like, what is any of this? I don't understand what's going on. But after like kind of immersing myself in the material to make this game, me and the other designer who worked with me on it, we started playing like war game Airland Battle, which is by there's a company called Eugen Systems, which makes like some pretty good actually like real-time sort of military simulation games. And it's like, holy crap, I understand what is going on. I get this. And it was really bizarre because I had tried playing it like a year before and just whoosh, like went completely over my head. And we came back and we were actually able to play it. And I'm actually significantly more able to play war games now. All it took was making one. And so I think that's kind of interesting, but they're also like really boring, like unsatisfying games. And like we'll play a round of it, we'll spend an hour, and then just when it's done, it's just like, oh, like that was a slog, and I don't know if I enjoyed it, but I guess we keep doing it occasionally, so I must enjoy it kind of. But it's just different. I mean, like I had like 1,000 hours in TF2. Right, like that's not just like that's not the kind of thing that you end and you're just like, oh, you know. But that's where I am, I guess, now, as somebody who plays games that are just kind of infrequent and slogs. Yeah, like I really can't play first-person shooters anymore. It's not really I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, for me, my remedy was just completely going all in with indie games and just going, you know, give me something different and unique. Like I don't want to play the same games anymore. Like the whole last year, like everybody's like top 10 list of AAA games, like I just didn't even bother playing them because I feel like I've already played them many times over. and it was
Yeah.
why like something like Hades was number one for me, and then number three was Monster Train. Like the last like AAA game I really enjoyed was Doom Eternal, and that was just because they went so over the top with that design. But other than that, it's just been very slim pickings for me in terms of wanting to buy a AAA title.
Yeah.
Let's see a few other questions. Ten Dot asked, "Where did you get the idea slash inspiration for Space Chem specifically? You seem to have went from that to more programming focus until making a Moloch synth." Well, I'm pretty sure I just horribly butchered that one.
Malexentez.
There we go.
It's Russian, maybe not. So you're skipping over a bunch of games. So Space Chem was okay. So when I was in college, I watched a bunch of How It's Made, and one of the first sort of Zach likes that I made was a game called Manufactoid, and it was about building factories. And you had to program the game in Lua because I really couldn't figure out a better way to put you in control, like to allow you to customize the behavior of the factory, which was terrible. It was very bad. Nobody still knows Lua. It's a terrible programming language, but it's easy to embed in things. And I wanted to make a game that was like that, but didn't require programming. And that was how I made a Flash game called The Codex of Alchemical Engineering, which was on Congregate and was actually like it was a decent hit on Congregate. I won like one of their weekly challenges or something, which was pretty cool. Um, so I make that game, and that's instead of like having to write code to control your factory, you just use little symbols. And so I made a bunch of Flash games. I made Infiniminer. That all happened. The indie game boom was happening. I wanted to make a commercial game, so I was like, okay, Codex of Alchemical Engineering was really good. I had toyed with the idea of following that up almost immediately with a game where you build like chemistry molecules instead of alchemy molecules, but I never made it. So that was what Space Chem ended up being. Was how do what would be this bigger, better version of the Codex of Alchemical Engineering that is about chemistry? Excuse me. One of the things that was inspiring was I'd moved to Seattle in like 2008 to work at Microsoft, and there's a park in Seattle called Gasworks Park, which is where it was like it was a coal gasification plant. I haven't told this story in a long time, so I forget some of the details, but they converted like coal into like coal gas, which is you can burn it like in lamps and stuff. This was more of an important thing years ago. And so this plant, it was this huge like chemical processing plant. And at some point they shut it down, and it was a super fun site, and then they cleaned it up, and then they turned it into a park. And the cool thing is that all of like a bunch of the chemical stacks and like all the infrastructure of it still stands in a fenced off part of the park. So you go to this park, there's a beautiful lookout over like the water, and then there's this huge chemical processing plant just kind of preserved there as like an architectural detail, as sort of like extra large architectural folly. And it's super cool. And I saw this, and I was just like, oh my god, like this is amazing. Like, what if you could build like these towers and connect them with pipes and do all this stuff, and you'd have chemical reactions going on in them, and they would pass between them. And so that was Space Chem. It was an extension of the sort of like atom, like moving atoms around and gluing them together mechanics of the Codex, but with this idea of like it's bigger. There's this bigger system where you're laying down pipes and putting reactors around and stuff like that. So that was Space Chem. We followed up Space Chem with Ironclad Tactics, which was not a success, and showed us that people didn't like our games in general. They specifically liked our puzzle games.
Hey, I liked Ironclad.
You and a couple other people.
Thank you.
Weirdly, like people who are interested in game design for game design's sake tend to like Ironclad Tactics and now Mobius Front. Like they're not fun. Like the general population does not like them, but people who are interested in game design, I heard a bunch of game designers say like, "Oh, that was a really cool game." And it's just like, too bad there aren't more people like you. So I know you like it. To Pion. Yeah. So we in the wake of Ironclad Tactics, we sort of scaled down the studio, and we were like, okay, what are we going to do to not go out of business? And so we made Infinite Factory, which was taking, an idea I'd come up with years before. I thought that with Minecraft coming out and kind of doing the whole block thing, that it was overdone, and like I couldn't really make another, it didn't make sense for me to make another game with blocks. But then I had like some totally random guy who was emailing me and was just like, you need to take back what's yours and take back the block throne from Minecraft. And it was like it was a little too much, but like at the same time I was like, you know what, I can make a game with blocks in it, you're right. And so we made this game that was sort of like blocky building, but also, was like Space Chem, and it was a puzzle game. It was kind of a hit. The making a game that was about programming, the TIS 100 thing, was just like an accident. That was just like a weird spin-off of a side project that didn't go anywhere. And then I went and worked at Valve for 10 months. And then when I left Valve and went back to running my own studio, we needed like a game to make. And it was like, okay, TIS was kind of fun. Like, what if we made a better version of TIS? And so that was Shenzhen. But then after that, we made a remake of the Codex, which was Opus Magnum. So that was another non-programming game. So, but then we followed that up with Xpunks, which was another programming game. And then we made Eliza and Mobius Front, which were sort of like a two. They were like we made those at the same time, and I think a lot of people don't realize that they're like, oh, why are you making so many non-puzzle games? It's like, well, because we made 2 games at the same time over 2 years, so like they were a package deal. So yeah, so that was. I feel like only half of those were programming games in there, if not fewer. So that was to answer a very long-winded question, or answer to a question about why we haven't made more games like Space Chem, which is that we have.
It's all just hidden in all kinds of other genres and designs. And yeah, like it's very interesting about what you said regarding like Ironclad Mobius being like game designs that are interesting to other game designers or people who understand design.
Yeah.
And that's always been, I think, like a very tricky thing. It's something that I've thought about when we talk about like marketing some of these games. That it's hard to kind of put into words. I think like what makes a game like Space Chem or Ironclad or Shenzhen like very appealing. And
it's not to most people. Right? Honestly, our programming games are really popular with games programmers. Right? Like all of our games are sort of made for like games people, weirdly. It just happens that there's more people who want to play game programmer games than game designer games.
Let's see. What questions we got? Actually got quite a bit. Let's see. This was a question from a while. Vench asked, how do you design puzzles without solving them? And this came in as you were talking about your puzzle philosophy.
I mean, I think this is where it's important that they're not really puzzles, right? They're activities, they're like open-ended prompts to combine tools into something that satisfies requirements. And it's a lot easier to sort of eyeball, like, is this possible with these tools? Probably, And I do some play testing. I just don't necessarily like play all of everything, but like somebody plays it. Right? Like, I mean, this is true with a lot. This is true with Mobius Front. Like more than our puzzle games. It's very hard to play a level in a strategy game that you designed every aspect of, because it's like, am I having fun? It's like I don't know. Like I'm just going through the. It's like, oh, I'm getting ambushed by the ambush that I set up for myself. Like it's not the same. Like we played when we started working on Mobius Front, we played it against each other in the office, like me and the other designer, and that was really engaging. And then by the time we got to the point where we were playing against AI, we'd been working on it for like a year and a half, and we knew everything about the game, and there were just no surprises left. And this is, I think that happens, I think, to a lot of game designers. Like this is why you lean on play testers. And so the same thing is kind of true with our puzzles. Like I don't solve all of them, but just like I don't have to. And I don't want to, because it's not interesting, and I can kind of do it vicariously. Like you can use other people's experiences as your own, and sort of like design. I don't know. Like it's just we're all bigger than ourselves, right? I think just being able to tap into that is pretty useful. I don't have to experience everything myself in order to experience it.
And let's see, what else came in?
Somebody asked about when I was at Valve. I was tired of running a game studio. So I don't own Zachtronics. You said I was the owner of Zachtronics, but that's not true. I I used to own I used to be one of the owners of Zachtronics, and then we shut the studio down. I went and worked at Valve because I was tired of running and owning a game studio, because it actually made it really hard to be creative.
Hmm.
That a lot of people who make games, they make a game, right? They spend years and years and years making a game, and then that's the game you see from them. And it gets a lot harder when you have to keep repeating, like, not that we were successful, but we have to keep repeating some level of success, and it gets hard to be creative. And so I was like, I'm tired of doing this. I'm tired of being in the hot seat. It turns out, so I went and worked at Valve. This was when they were doing the Vive and getting ready to launch the Vive, and I'd always wanted to do VR stuff. Like when I was in high school, I tried really hard to. That was in like the early 2000s, and so we were sort of in this gap where like all the VR of the 90s, which was admittedly terrible, had completely fallen out of people's interest. And then before, like, Palmer Luckey like came and saved us all and gave us modern VR, and so we were sort of in that like that pre-rapture period. And Palmer Luckey, may he rest in peace. Yeah, so yeah, it was just in this weird period where there was no VR stuff happening, but I was like trying really hard. I was like, oh, I'm going to build my own VR thing. Like I didn't, because I didn't know how to do that, because I was a stupid high schooler who wasn't technically savvy enough to do any of this stuff. And then like 10 years later, VR happens for real. And it's like, oh, I guess I am kind of interested in this still. And so like I knew some people at Valve, and I got a job there, and I worked on the Vive. I wrote, if you have a Vive and you do the room setup tool, I wrote that, and did most of like a lot of the design on it. If you fire up the lab, there's a bullet hell shooter called Zortex 26XX. I wrote most of that, and did a bunch of the design on that. I also worked on the VR tutorial, but I don't know if they kept that. And then I was tired of working at Valve because they weren't making games. And the two things I could have worked on were Half-Life Alyx, which turned out to be a very impressive game, but I was tired of working. I really don't care for VR. And I didn't really want to work on that for years, which really turned out to be years. Or I could have worked on the Artifact, like the card game, Artifact, which they didn't even really want that many people to work on it because it was kind of a small project. And then look how that turned out. So yeah, so this with those being my two alternatives, I was like, you know what, I think I'm going to leave. And I had sort of accidentally found somebody and convinced them to buy Zachtronics from us so that we could just work it as a normal job. They were we still are part of their company. They used to do a lot of distribution of physical like game. They put games in boxes and then put those on shelves in Walmarts. And this was like a huge business. And we're like, oh, this is great. Like this will be like the flywheel we need to like help us like wither, or to weather like a like a dry spell or a flop or whatever, because we, after Ironclad Tactics, we knew what it was like to have a flop and, and have it almost like put, if we weren't doing contract work at the same time, it probably would have put us out of business. So, we joined up with this bigger company that would provide like kind of some shelter for us against the irregularities of making indie games.
Yeah, and that's been something we've been discussing a lot more lately. Excuse me. And just how difficult it is, like, in terms of surviving in this market. I've been keeping an eye on Arkin Games with Chris Parker. I know he's been having a little bit of trouble with AI Wars too. And like you said, it's, for a lot of studios, they become known for that one game. And then it's a case of, do I keep making that one game, or do I try something else? And then if it fails, what happens?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it's kind of like being like a deer or whatever in the woods, and it's just like, would you say like it's hard to survive as a deer in the woods? It's like, well, it's just kind of in their nature to get killed. Right? Like no one really cares. Like it's just in their nature. Like the goal is not to keep all the deer alive. They just die like fairly easily. And I sort of feel the same way about like game studios, right? Like there's no reason a game studio has to exist. There's no reason we have to make money. Like it's just a fluke when we do, right? Yeah. I would say like we're lucky, but like it's not really just luck, right? Like obviously like we're surfing some sort of vague wave of like what people are interested in and sort of parlaying like we've got past successes. How do we turn our past successes into future successes? Some people would call that like branding or whatever, but You know, like it's just there's no reason that any of this is supposed to be possible.
Hmm.
It's just circumstance. You just make the most of it while you can.
Yeah. And it's very, again, like there are a lot of developers, especially in like the last 4 or 5 years, who like getting in the game industry, and it's hard to give anyone, I think, really solid advice. And
Oh
like,
yeah. It's like, what advice do you give a deer?
there we go.
Don't die. That's the secret. You know?
There we.
Like there are no rules,
Hmm.
right? Like just don't fail. Like I the best advice I ever got was from so you know Scribble Knots, right? Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
the studio that the guy who ran the studio that made Scribble Knots, we had just come out with Ironclad Tactics, and we were at like a sort of like industry, like a, in games industry night at a bar, and he's just like, yes, Ironclad Tactics. We're like, yeah, didn't exactly do what we thought, and he's just like, why didn't you just make a better game? And we're like, what? And he's just like, like make a game that would do better. Like it's about Civil War robots. Like people aren't interested in that. And at the time I was sort of flabbergasted. I'm like, what do you think we were trying to do? We were trying to make a good game. And then like over the years it kind of dawned on me. It's just like, no, we really weren't trying to make a successful game. Or he's like, why don't you make a successful game? Was what he said. Because like he's like, Space Cam was brilliant. Clearly you're capable of making, like a successful game. And that's what it was. It's not, why don't you make a better game? Why don't you make a successful game? And I said, like, that's what we were trying to do, is to make a successful game. But like if you look at our behaviors, we weren't really trying to make
Hmm.
a successful game. Like making a successful game is like making Call of Duty, right? That's what trying to make a successful game looks like. You do something that people are gonna like. And Civil War robots, nobody wants to play a game about Civil War robots, you know? And so, I mean, ironically, he couldn't make a successful game because they went out of business.
Yeah.
But after like making lots of games that he thought were interesting that other people didn't, but like it's very, I understand that.
Hmm.
But I just think that was honestly the best advice anybody's ever given me, because it really cuts straight to the heart of it. Like he was
Hmm.
right. You just have to make a successful game. It just turns out it's kind of hard. It
Yeah.
is hard to predict what will be successful.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's the only advice, period, right? Because you can do anything, right? Like it's amazing if you look at like all the things that are successful. Like I would have never said like, oh yeah, Factorio, make Factorio and you'll be successful, right?
Hmm.
But like everybody loves Factorio, but no one knew, right? And then like
Hmm.
somebody will come in and try to say like, oh, there's a genre there, but it's like, well, there wasn't a genre there when they made Factorio, like when they started.
Yep.
Like it's only a genre because people are like cloning it and it still kind of works. You can copy success and it kind of works.
Yeah, and that's we'll probably be seeing from Among Us for like the next few years as
Oh yeah,
well.
yep,
We already
exactly.
saw somebody try to copy Among Us last week when we were looking at like upcoming indie games.
Yep,
Somebody's already trying to make it the next Among Us, and
yep.
it didn't
There's
look
gonna
that
be a bunch of
good.
them.
Yeah.
But some, like one of them might work, right? Like who
Hmm.
knows? Like it's not even like you can say that's a bad strategy. That's probably a good strategy. It's better than what we do. Like,
Yeah.
don't make Mobius Front 83. don't copy that game. Yeah, unless
Yeah.
you can do it and do it better. Maybe it will work, right?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be embarrassing? We're
Oh.
just this close.
Well, there you go, chat. Somebody go out there and see if you can out Zach like Zach here.
Yeah.
And but I think what he said though, as you said, the idea of making a successful game, and I think it's one of those things that when we first think about it, it does sound like what the hell is this person's talking about, but it's something that I think I've seen a lot, unfortunately, from first-time indie developers. That they'll take an idea and they'll make something that it's just very hard to know what was this market, whether it's from a design standpoint, a presentation standpoint, or all the above. Like I've seen games from developers that there's like no marketing, nothing was done to kind of make it palatable, and then it's a case of how did you expect this to succeed? Like there wasn't anything there. And again, it's hard to like convince or to explain to somebody, how do you do something successful? It's very easy to say, just make a successful game.
Yeah, but there is no answer, right? It's just, I
Hmm.
think it really is just like defining the criteria. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's just pretty honest. It's not advice, right? I mean, that's the joke that I'm telling, is that it's not advice,
Yeah.
but like because there is no advice, right? I think in general, like advice only works for things that are reliable. Like you should go to the dentist twice a year, is pretty good advice, because it kind of work. It's true for most situations, I think. you know.
Mm-hmm.
But like the same is not true for like complicated fields like media, you know, like trying to make successful media. There
Yeah.
is no advice there.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a talk. There was a keynote at PAX Dev one year. It was the guy who did the Exploding Kittens Kickstarter, and he was trying to give all this advice for how to run a successful Kickstarter, having made like the most successful Kickstarter at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, this is stupid. Like, this is all stuff you did. This is particular to you, and like you can't just like recreate it. Like there weren't a bunch of other Kickstarters that same like of the same magnitude immediately after because everybody just followed that logic, right? This is a lot of people like a lot of people go on at GDC and all these things and they talk about why they're successful, and it's just like, no, like this actually is not like a predictive model.
Yeah.
This is just like a post hoc analysis. It's like genres, right? It's just like a post hoc analysis. Like you're not actually like testing these theories, you know, to see if they're generally applicable. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, and I hate to be cynical, but I'm just waiting for all the talks and like deep breakdowns about Among Us being like this big name success,
Oh yeah,
when
yeah.
none of that's going to be relevant, I think.
Yeah, it's like Flappy Bird. When
Yeah,
Flappy Bird happened, a bunch of people tried to analyze it and figure out how to recreate that success. And it's like, no, it's just like a weird thing.
yeah,
But somebody said that, you know, humans in chat, just like humans love putting names on things,
yeah.
you know, as people love to just like explain things. It doesn't really matter. Rarely do we test our explanations, which is like the real thing,
Yeah.
you know?
And I like a 10 dot. I am successful because I just made a successful game. It was that easy. There you go. There's our next GDC talk right there.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I gave a talk at GDC pretty recently, and people like you get feedback when you do a GDC talk, and one of the somebody gave me like a thumbs down
Oh.
because they're just like, I mean, a lot of people give me thumbs downs for a lot of things I do, but you know, just that like this is nice and all, but this is just a successful person talking about being successful. Like there's nothing here that helps me. And it's just like, oh yeah, no, sorry, I should have been more upfront about that. You know, like nothing from my story will help anybody. This is we're just here for entertainment purposes. You know.
Let's see. A few other questions that came in were like kind of going all over the place. So that's kind of how these discussions go. For those of you new watching us, Logan Q asked, "What are some of your favorite or most inspiring war games slash conflict sims, especially on the board game side?"
Oh, I don't. I hate board games. That's why they have it right in the name. They're boring. That's I do not. I'm incapable of playing board games. I was one of the first things to go when I stopped playing games. I like looking at them. I like touching them, but rarely do I like playing them. And I really don't play a lot of war games. I mean, it shows, right? Like I think Mobius Front is pretty solid proof that like I do not play many war games. You know, I liked StarCraft when I was a kid. That was exciting. Like I said, the Eugen Systems games I think are actually I enjoy those, but that was the thing I discovered after making Mobius Front for the most part. Don't play a lot of war games. Yeah.
That
I don't
helps
know.
be why I did kind of like I like Mobius Front probably more than a lot of the other people who kind of criticize it, because I'm not a war gamer either. Probably the same reason why I liked so much about Final Fantasy. I think it was 12 or 13,
Mm,
because it was like the least Final Fantasy of all the Final Fantasy games.
yeah. I think a lot of our war, if you can call Ironclad Tactics or Mobius Front war games, they're kind of board gamey, which is kind of funny because I just said I don't like board games, but I do like like I played like over the years I've played a bunch of Magic, the Gathering, and collectible card games and stuff. And I don't want to say like I like Magic because I don't really like it anymore, but I I think I've learned a lot from it or internalized a lot from it, like the small whole numbers, right? Games with and obviously there's randomness in Mobius Front, but it's like
Hmm.
constrained to a very specific area, and otherwise it's a lot of small like whole numbers. And Ironclad Tactics was nothing but small like integers, and so that kind of precision in our simulator, like our simulation games, I think is kind of directly mapped onto like our puzzle games, which are also very precise and predictable in that way.
Hmm.
So there's something there, but that's not like war games that I like. But I don't know if you'd call Magic a war game.
Hmm.
But I also yeah. I don't know. That's definitely something that feeds into it.
Hmm.
You know, a long time ago I played Final Fantasy Tactics and thought it was pretty cool, and I think that I don't like again. I don't play tactics games, but like the aspect of them where you have a bunch of units that you get to know intimately and choose from a list of abilities, like that is present in Mobius Front. It is not an accident. That was like a deliberate aesthetic choice that you're gonna have a tank and you're gonna be familiar with all of the different abilities that it can do, even if it's only a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This next one, I think this is a very interesting question. From Matt Kimball asked, how do you design around exploits in your games? For example, in Fin Factor, you can move objects across the map more quickly by using rotators instead of conveyor belts. Was that intentional or unintentional?
I think the fact that you're calling it an exploit is pretty. You know that it was unintentional because it was unintentional, and it looks unintentional. Um, yeah, I mean that's true in all of our games. If you make a game and ask people to optimize it, they will optimize it. Um, they will they will do everything possible to optimize it. There's always a discussion on our games, like when people have their high score. Like we don't have official like leaderboards on most of our games for like figuring out who has the best player, because it's almost impossible, because you can cheat in a lot of games. It's possible to cheat in our games, and I don't want to waste my time trying to clamp down on it. There's lots of things you can do that maybe aren't cheating that kind of are, like the giant rotating arms in Infinifactory. Like I don't know how to categorize that, right? I know that the players have grouped the leaderboards into ones that do and don't use giant rotating arms, and I think that's a pretty good solution. And I don't want to have to try to write code that can distinguish between the two, because we didn't even know that they existed. I think our games, we're pretty fast and loose with the content of our games, and all the times there are exploits like that, and they just kind of happen, right? And sometimes we try to do stuff about it. Usually we can't. Um, yeah, there was like a thing in Opus Magnum. We tried to do something about people building like non-repeating, because we only ask you to make 6 of something to prove it, and so people would sometimes make solutions that just made exactly 6 of something and then broke. And like we can try to clamp down on that, but then they'll just make something that produces exactly 18 and then breaks or something. Like it's just not, at some point it's not worth it, right? At some point it's just like, you know what, if you're going to be really really good at the game, it is going to involve understanding and using exploits, and I think it's kind of inevitable, and it doesn't really harm the enjoyment for most people, I don't think. All of our games are hot messes, right? Like they're none of them are like super like perfect and precise. Like they're all hot messes, and just like it turns into a thing where it's just like, okay, 99% of our players are unaffected by this, so that's good enough, right? We're never going to get to it being like a perfect, like solid experience for 100% of people. I think some people, I think some game designers do a much better job of that, but like we put out a game a year, right? We can't be too precious.
And I think that kind of leads into like that territory of like emergent gameplay when people figure out these very weird exploits or tricks or how things work, and then become such a very fascinating way to kind of fit it all together. Stuff
Yeah.
like with Fin Factory, when I play like Prey 2017 or stuff like Dishonored, where they just basically give you this playground and it's just okay, figure this all out, and then it can lead to these like crazy situations.
Yeah. So people are asking about coffee. I actually don't drink caffeine. I had like a cup of decaf coffee before this. So maybe that is a little bit more caffeine than I'm used to, but I actually don't really drink caffeine anymore. This is just how I'm like all the time.
I'm on just a diet Pepsi. I've switched to diet over the last few years, but
Mhm.
someday I may try and give it up. I don't think that's going to work at this point for me. Let's see. What was the next question that came in? Uh, okay. This is one from. Oh, here's one from Nude Lion. Nude Lion? I hope I didn't butcher that too badly. They ask, what's the hardest Zachtronics game in both your and my opinion?
Oh, what's the hardest Zachtronics game? Um,
I'm
I'm not
not.
really trying to think. Shinjin.io gets pretty hard on some, like the bonus levels for Shinjin.io are pretty hard. Um, Usually it comes down to how many constraints there are, and so like Opus Magnum was, I think, partially like part of its popularity was that it does away with a lot of constraints.
Mhm.
Um, so that makes it easier. Shinjin.io is very constrained. I don't know. It's just sort of like how what people think. Space Chem is kind of hard. Space Chem seems pretty hard. I think
Yeah.
that's maybe a good candidate. Like either the hardest levels in Shenzhen IO or the hardest levels in Space Chem are all pretty tricky. There's definitely some like the last couple levels in Infinifactory are insane. I did not even attempt to solve them. People have. It's doable, right? Like you just have to stick with it long enough. I mean, I think this is sort of one of the problems with our games is that at some point they really do turn into work, and even I don't want to do it, But I don't know. People seem to I keep making hard puzzles, and people keep solving them. So like that to me, that sends the signal that it's still worth doing. So maybe that's bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for those of you watching, I think the only game from Zach that I did beat all the way through was Ironclad. And again, that's because it's the most non-programming game. That was the game for game designers. So it worked for someone who's in gameplay, so it worked well for me.
Yeah. Are we getting I noticed there's somebody in chat who's talking about stuff that is unrelated to games.
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of interesting for a second, because this is actually one of the things that I was sort of wrestling with while we were doing Mobius Front. I don't think this is the answer you're looking for, Worshia, but about complicity and like being complicit in things. And this was definitely like trying to make I think there's some moral issues that come up when you're making a war game, which is that like sort of like what's your stance on war? Right. And like there's like this I can't really do this topic justice, right? Because there's things that people have said, like, the idea that like you can't make a movie about war without it glamorizing it, right? Because most things when you try to depict something in like in movies, you often try to make it beautiful, and it's difficult, right? And so like that is it seems like something that's kind of off topic, but it's kind of on topic, right? For making these kinds of games. And I think this is something like kind of the thing that you're trying to draw a contrast by saying like, how can you like about like focusing on something as like trivial as games, and then like contrasting that with like selective like things that are going on in the world that are difficult for people. And I think that is like a good. I don't know. I mean that's something that I thought about a lot and don't have a good answer for, but I think it's a good it's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I mean, I know the Prison Architect developer, Introversion, they ran into a lot of that too. Like, when the game came out, nobody really thought about it, but then, as the news started to develop and people were looking around, they found this lovely little game where you run prisons, and suddenly there were a lot of discussions.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that was, yeah. This was something we kind of tried to thematically kind of handle in Mobius Front, that it's not really taking too much of a stance. It's just trying to depict it, but also like sort of the question of like, I mean, like obviously it's a game where you play as America fighting against America, right? Like there's a political message in there. It's not like the red state, blue state Civil War angle. It's just about sort of America dealing with its demons as being like, oh yeah, like we're this great freedom loving country who happens to export lots of violence all over the world, and like has this history of like being at or near the top through violence. And like, how do you reconcile that? Like there's lines in the story like, like what is it? It's actually been a while since I've read the script for the game, but just like like it's like who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. It's not really about that, and like the soldiers trying to deal with it. So yeah, this is why we made it about America versus America. A lot of games they'll pick another country like the Russia or China or North Korea and have you fighting against that. And I think we wanted to do a war game thematically, but right away we're just like, wow, this is really uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. How weird is that? Just say like you're gonna make a game and you're gonna come up with some fantasy and you're gonna be like China. We're gonna imagine a war with China, and it's just like, oh, like that's kind of horrifying. I don't know, it's kind of weird. One of the guys I worked with at Valve, he didn't want to work on Half-Life Alyx either, because it's just like, it's kind of weird that we're making a game where like it puts you into a body where you're like shooting people with guns, and it's like making that as real as possible. And it like that, like he was like a father, and he just kind of was just like, yeah, I'm not comfortable with this, like this is too weird. And this stuff comes up. Yeah, I don't know. Games are weird. Yeah, and like the Prison Architect thing, it's kind of weird if you think about it, right? And it's possible to both like think about stuff and not think about stuff. And I don't have a good answer. We should probably get off this topic. I don't want to say anything stupid, but it's a challenge. It's hard to balance all these aspects of being a person.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's definitely a whole lot discussed about kind of like the politics of what it means to make some of these games. Like we could spend an hour talking about Spec Ops: The Line and what they did in terms of everything in that one, because that game wasn't politicized at all, right? Everybody, that was just a pro America game.
Yeah. Anyway, we can go back to talking about fun stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. I wanted to acknowledge that person so they didn't feel like they're just being ignored with their ranty sideways thing. They were trying to derail us, so we can have some fun with it. I don't know.
Well, in terms of happy topics, here's one from Celis. Ask, if you had a few $1 million in budget, a big and skilled team, a few years in full creative freedom, what game would you make?
Oh, I don't know. I'm I feel like I'm I don't feel like my trajectory is on making things bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't even want to do that. It's exhausting. It's weird because like you like in order to make this comes back to the success thing. Like in order to make a very expensive game, you need to be making something that looks like it's going to be successful. And so I guess I don't even fantasize about the idea of having like I used to think like, oh, if I had a big budget, I'd make some big like a big fancy high budget space chem. That's like that doesn't even make any sense at all. Like I think now I'm just kind of too grounded in reality that it's just like if somebody gave me a lot of money, it would have a lot of strings attached to it to make a game that I probably don't want to work on and like wouldn't be able to design. And so I'm not even creative. I'm not fun enough to answer that question in a fun way. I don't want money. Like you don't want like that kind of money comes with it comes with constraints, right? And that's sort of the last thing I'm in the mood for right now are big constraints.
And man, it's that always like very challenging part when it comes to game development. The idea that I can make anything I want, so what the hell do I make to begin with? And we've seen developers unfortunately struggle with that question because the beauty about constraints is it focuses what you are able to do. And I think a lot of developers get in thinking, I'm just going to make my perfect, 900-hour long RPG open world procedurally generated roguelike, and I'm going to spend all this time on it, and it turns into just like a mess because there's nothing to really ground it or focus that idea.
Yeah. It gets even harder when you've made like 10 games trying to do something that's original.
Another question, Mark Gabby asked, any fan creations made with Shenzhen LCD mode or on the Redshift in EXA punks that you thought were particularly interesting and why?
The sandboxes in those games are kind of limited. I think the ones in Infinifactory are always the craziest because they'll manage to make like a 3D spatial computer. I saw somebody just the other day that made like a simple computer, and it's just made out of blocks that are being pushed back and forth, and it's pretty crazy. That's the kind of stuff that I certainly never imagined. The sandbox in Shenzhen IO is like we gave people tools and then they made stuff with it. So there's definitely like impressive things. Like somebody made like a first person maze game that was pretty impressive. My favorites are always the ones that play music, especially because before we had like in one of the Shenzhen updates we added like a fancy little synthesizer, but before that we just had like a little beeper speaker, and so people were playing songs with it and like a bunch of them, and they were completely out of key because they did not correspond to musical notes, so you just had to find the closest note, and it was very charming. It was definitely my favorite. But not the most technically impressive.
Let's see. I think there's another question here.
Someone asked about key bindings. You can customize all the key bindings in Mobius Front. You have no excuse not to buy that game now. Go.
There you go. A completely off-topic question about RP0 ask, how do you manage to keep up with a ton of emails in your email box? And my answer is I don't. I still have so many emails to answer.
The answer is 0 inbox.
There you go.
We were talking before about advice, right? And how you can't give people many advice. 0 inbox, do it. That is the only way to manage email. And I'm able to answer everybody who emails me pretty quickly, pretty personably, and the solution is 0 inbox. It is not even a choice in my mind, right? That is an absolute, like, brush your teeth twice a day and zero out your inbox once a day. Like, somebody's asking zero inboxes and no inbox. That would be a better solution, but inbox zero, I guess. Yeah, inbox zero, I guess. I have an inbox. I keep it empty. When something comes in my inbox, I deal with it. I do not let stuff pile up. You definitely like use the archive feature in your email service. It's a good hygienic thing for your brain.
There we go.
That's the theme of this decade that we're entering now, is mental hygiene. You gotta keep the bad memes out. You gotta keep your inbox empty. You gotta keep your social media under control. It's all about mental hygiene.
Let's see. Another question from Tendai. They ask, wonder what your thoughts are on other programming style games like Human Resource Machine or 7 Billion Humans. Have you ever tried those out?
I played Human Resource Machine, played through most of it. I have a hard time truly appreciating other people's games when they're too close to mine, because I just get kind of like jealous. I think part of what sustains me is this sort of like totally, like easily falsifiable belief that like I'm the greatest game designer ever. You kind of have to believe in yourself a little too much, I think, to be able to have like a strong, consistent creative performance. And so I do have I don't really seek out, like I really have to avoid looking at like the Steam homepage, because you look at it and it's kind of demoralizing when you're a game developer, because you just see all these games coming out, and like I wish I was like a normal person where I'd see all these games coming out and I'd be like, ooh, I want to buy these and play these. But instead it's just like, oh god, look at all these games coming out. They're so much better than mine. Why even bother? I should just stop. I should just go do anything else. Like it instantly is demoralizing. And so I despise the Steam pop-ups. Every time I open Steam, it's like, hey, look at this game that's doing better than yours and is getting advertised unlike your games. And it's not good for me. So no, I don't play. If I play a game, it has to be completely unrelated to anything that I make.
There we go.
Yeah. Somebody asked if you could release a game on an old console, which machine would you choose? I think the answer for this would be the Nintendo, because we are just about to announce a Kickstarter for an NES version of Hack Match, the action puzzler minigame that was in Exapunks. So that is coming very soon. We spent like a year doing it, and it's ready to go.
Nice. Yeah, and the whole like modern retro, I mean, that's definitely a topic in of itself. And
yeah, that's another thing I try to avoid, right? Because I want to believe that I'm the only person who ported a modern game to the NES, right? When you realize that everybody else is also making NES games, it really kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of it.
Oh, yes. There's quite a bit of them.
I'm the only person to do it, and ours is amazing.
There we go. There's some advertising for everyone watching.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, there are no other modern NES games. Yeah, but yeah, it's coming very soon. It adds versus mode, which is super fun. That's pretty cool. I don't know how to demo it on here. I don't know how to do that, but yeah, it is coming soon.
There we go. Another question from Rubik's asks, why did you make Nerds? And they said competitive solitaire isn't actually all that interesting.
It says it on the Steam page. Like, go read it on the Steam page. We played it in the office. We stopped going to the office because there's a pandemic, so I made a version we could play from home. So it is spelled out on the Steam page for it. It's like the whole marketing gimmick.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I think I'm almost catching up with all the questions here. Another one from Tendot asked, subreddits for your games have a lot of posts of crazy things built in Shenzhen IO. Have you seen these? If so, what is your favorite one?
That was what we talked about with the crappy music.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The beeps and the boops. They're my favorite.
All right. Here's one from Will. They ask, what's Zachtronic's method for prototyping ideas if you have one?
Oh, yeah, the best way to prototype a game is to make it and then ship it. And then you'll get feedback from people about what you did wrong. Most of our games, we just sort of take a stab at it and they don't always end up perfectly, right? I think Malexin kind of falls into this bucket. Like there was some stuff we wanted to do that didn't really work, and so it was sort of a prototype, right? It was an experiment. I think other people might have like killed it. We just ship a lot of ours, right? Unless it looks like we're gonna have to spend a year on something that's not promising. All of our games are sort of prototypes.
Mm. And I guess like building off of that, I think another question for you. I think we may have spoken about this. I think right around the time of either Ironclad or Infinifactory. But you've done a lot more with early access over the last few years compared to back with before Space Chem, no Space Chem, and I think TIS could have been not early access, or maybe
it was early access. The Space Chem, there wasn't early access when
Yeah.
Space Chem came out. So yeah, we did early access. We stopped doing early access with Eliza because it didn't make sense. We didn't do it with Mobius Front either, but probably should have, because it would have been easier to communicate. And our next game's gonna be early access. So yeah, we do early access. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a label you can turn on that kind of signals to people that you're working on the game in a different way than they might assume if it's not early access. I don't even know if it matters anymore, right? It's very difficult to tell what makes a game successful or how the press is going to engage with it or if it even matters, right? We do it. I don't really know why. It seems like we're better off when we do it with most of our games than if we don't.
Yeah, it's become its own like market, much like Kickstarter, that you need to plan it out. But
you don't have to plan it out. You can release a game that's almost done and you can say it's early access and it's fine. Right? It's just like it's a little blue thing you can turn on that has feelings associated with it in the minds of consumers. And it's hard to generalize. Some people say, "Oh, I see early access." It says no buy. And it's like, "Cool. No one cares." Like lots of other people will buy it, like it's just a little blue rectangle that you can turn on. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Let's see. This comment came in that I really like from Pedro. They said this a while ago. Goes, my dad is absolutely flabbergasted when he sees me optimizing TIS 100 solutions. This seems like work. And yeah, like a lot of your games, like programmers like it because it's like basically you're bringing your work home with you in a lot of cases, or an easier version of it.
Yeah, well, I think if it was truly like work, I don't think people would like doing it, right? It's just that it's a different kind of activity. It in some ways resembles things that some people do for a living, but it's done up differently, and some people like it. I don't know. Some people complain about our games being too much like work, but I don't know. I think a lot of games kind of resemble work, superficially, right? It's because I think like work is not like. I think part of that speaks to like the way that people think about work now, right? That work is something that's like different from the rest of your life, right? Like, and I don't think that's true. Like, if you go back hundreds of years, like people did like piecework on like crafty stuff, just that was just part of life. That was like a thing you would do in the evening to like get some. I was reading this book about like the history of France. And it was just like, oh yeah, like sometimes like women would get together and they would do piecework and like do like repair like repair clothing and stuff for small amounts of money, and they would use that money to buy candles because candles were expensive, so that they could stay up and talk and do piecework, And so it's like it was just like it was like a social activity, and it was like a thing you did to like be able to fund like the lighting so you could hang out in the light and talk. And stuff like that, right? And we have this bizarre idea of like the separation of like work, of work and life, which I think has more to do with like our notion of what constitutes work nowadays. But like, it doesn't. I don't know. Like to me it seems very natural because for me like my work is my life, and the two bleed, especially now, right? Yeah. Like the two really do kind of just like seamlessly bleed in and out, And like being my own boss, like. If I want to spend my time, if I think it's the right thing to do for me to like during work hours, go get a haircut, it's just like, I can make that decision for myself. I know that I'll work more later if I feel like I need to. I don't know. Like I don't know. Like it doesn't have to be like a completely separate thing. And I think that's true of our games, that like they kind of resemble work kind of, but like, I don't really believe that there has to be that kind of distinction between work and life.
And especially like these days as well, like you said, like for me, like all my days are spent doing like video editing and writing now. So I've, other than for like the
Yeah,
game streams, I really don't have time to play as many games.
yeah.
And yeah, it's basically like your work becomes your career. Let's see. Herman asked us a while ago, do you think dependency injection could be used as an interesting puzzle mechanic?
Maybe. I'm not going to make a game about that anytime soon. That sounds a little too focused. I'm not sure. Usually our games are about creating stuff, like our puzzly games. They're about something that you build, something that you can construct things, not about like little. This is like why we made a hacking game that's not really about hacking.
Yeah. Let's see. Lawrence asked, don't know if this was already asked, do you have any plans / ideas for your next puzzle game?
Yeah, we're working on games. You'll play it eventually.
Probably sooner than Half-Life 3, right?
I have no idea.
Right.
Who knows when Half-Life 3 is or isn't coming out? It's impossible to say.
There we go. One asked this. I'm not sure if this was on top or not, but any interest in making a Zach card game?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Is like making a card game, like a real life card game. I don't know. Who knows? Who knows what we're gonna do next, right? I said we're about to release a Nintendo game. That's pretty weird. Yeah, who knows?
Let's see. IMVN asked, wonder if you have any spicy opinions on mono repo for version control.
Oh, is this just like using a mono repo versus using like a bunch of smaller repos? I don't know what that means. Like, and I've heard people talk about this. We do one repo per game, and then we just kind of hard fork our game engine for each game, and then adapt it to fit the new game. I don't really know if it's that interesting to talk too much about how we develop software. It's pretty boring. We try to keep it as boring as possible, because stuff that is exciting in software development land is a headache for somebody 10 years later when they're trying to keep your stuff running. I had to go through and we had to change servers, and it turns out we were hard coding some URLs into some of our games that we couldn't carry with us. And so I had to go back through all of our games and recompile them with new URLs in it. And it was a headache, and the repos where we tried to do more clever things were absolutely the worst ones to get working again. So
I think we have... I think this should be the last question for right now. I think we finally just about caught up. Kinjo asked, I am new to your game, so I noticed one of them is a visual novel rather than a puzzle game. Any reason why you chose to make a visual novel? And any thoughts on visual novels in general?
So we made a visual novel because our writer wanted to make a visual novel, and it seemed like a good idea. So most of our games are me saying, oh, this is what we're going to do next, guys. The Eliza was our writer saying, hey, this is what I want us to do next, and I was like, okay. And I early on I was like, okay, if you think we should do a visual novel, like, show me sales data for other visual novels on Steam, and we'll see about it. And he comes back with a list, and like all of them were erotic, and so I was like, you know what, we'll do it anyway. Yeah. So yeah, he wanted to do it. I think he wanted it. If you look around online, you can find lots of interviews with Matthew, and he talks about sort of where Eliza came from, and he could do a much better job explaining that than I can. But yeah, it was something that was personal to him that he really wanted to write, and it's very good. And I'm glad we made it. It's like, I don't know. I think to a lot of people are like, oh, what is a Zachtronics game? Like, does it have to be designed by Zach? And it's like, well, that's already not really true, because all of our games are designed by like a mix of people, and it's complicated. But that was definitely like his brainchild. So I would never think to make a visual novel on my own, but that doesn't mean that they're not cool.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Jonathan Blow showed up saying, make a Quantum Circuit game. Don't add him.
I don't. What do you mean by don't at you? Like, don't call you out in chat? Like like we just did a second ago,
Yeah.
or yeah, I don't know. Make a quantum circuit game. I was I talked to some people from IBM about making a quantum circuit game with them, but it didn't it it doesn't make any sense. As far as I can tell, all of the quantum computing stuff makes zero sense. I am not smart enough to understand it, let alone make a game about it. And there's somebody else who did make a game about it called like Quantum something, and there's actually a lot of people working to make like quantum circuit games, and they're completely not understandable because it's made up nonsense. I am not fond. After the more I looked into it, the more I hated it, and just how little sense it makes. So quantum computing is not the same as conventional computing in terms of how fun it is to make video games about.
And if John ever wants to come on and talk about the design on one of these casts, definitely get in touch with us. I'll be more than happy to talk about Braid and the Witness and whatever else. Thanks. I hated it, Zach. Yep. There we go.
Pretty much. That was my reaction to quantum stuff.
Bring this back to design or about gameplay, like stuff like Mobius Front, and even with something like Ironclad Tactics. Again, I think the whole Ironclad Tactics fan club is probably watching this stream right now. I wanted to talk a little bit about the design difference between these games compared to, again, like your programming or more kind of like more challenging games, or at least more critical thinking. And what I wanted to kind of ask you about is, when I play stuff like Mobius Front and Ironclad Tactics, it definitely, I think, requires like a different kind of thought process. Like there's like a different sense of balance to playing one of those games compared to more of the programming oriented ones. And what I just want to ask you is, like, and like even let's say on top of Mobius Front, what was kind of like your goal in terms of like balancing that gameplay out? Because you said it's not a war game. And I think when I did my review of it, I said that this is very much more of a puzzle game rather than, a turn-based strategy or, a grand strategy kind of gameplay.
Yeah. Some people thought it was too much of a puzzle game. Some people thought it was not enough of a puzzle game. Yeah. Beats me. I don't know what a grand strategy game, right? These are all just like words that people make up to describe like activities that are otherwise hard to describe. Like it's really hard to actually describe in a meaningful way like all the things that you do and the things that run through your head and the choices you make in a game like Mobius Front. This is when I said before that game genres don't exist. I truly don't think about that. We just made a game, right? And it requires what it requires. And again, I think this is one of our weaknesses, is that we're not like, in some ways, like don't really like speak games, but you got to work with what you got, right? Yeah. We made a game. And yeah, I think I have a tendency to balance stuff towards being kind of puzzly, just because that's what I get. For whatever reason, I understand puzzle games and I understand things as puzzle games. So that's just sort of where my brain goes, but I don't know.
I know somebody earlier asked you about playing stuff like 7 Billion Humans and Human Resource Machine. But I gotta ask, did you play Baba Is You? Because I think of like all the puzzle games I play, like that seems like to be like the closest in terms of what I see from the Zach-like genre.
No, I didn't. Again, like I avoid games that are too close to the ones that we make, just because it's. Yeah, I've seen it. I was at GDC when it won a bunch of awards. Yeah, yeah.
All right. Yeah, and I think what you said about like being too puzzle or not puzzle enough is just an interesting point about, again, going back to what we were saying earlier about some of the challenges of making some of these games. Because like there are people who looked at Mobius Front and thought, oh, it's going to be something just like Steel Panthers or World at War or any other, very grognardy kind of design. And they didn't, and I'm sure they unfortunately didn't like it. Just as you said, there are people who thought, oh, this is just like a puzzle game. I'm just trying to figure it out. But no, it's not quite like that either. And it's always weird when we see, or challenging to see, like games that kind of fall into these very specific like areas, and either in terms of like puzzle or action gameplay or anything thereof.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the question in there?
I was just making a comment.
I don't know. I mean, like I don't understand what we do, and I think most people haven't understood what we do, and I think that we like all of our successes have been things that we've done that are sort of just out of left field, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's you know, that's why I've got like one or two genres to my name, right? It's just that just gotta just making weird stuff. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Here's something I wanted to ask. I think we spoke about this before, but I think this will be good for people watching us as well. We spoke about, I think, one of our earlier casts about, uh, edutainment and bringing video games into schools. I know that I think it was either last year or maybe the year before that that you did like a really big push to allow schools to be able to experience your games. And I wanted to
Yeah.
give you like a second to kind of like talk about that for anyone new watching.
Yeah, for the last this is a fun thing. This is a fun story. So for the last two, like probably like 2.5, it's been public for like 2 years, but for the last 3 years, all of our games are free to public schools and things that are like public schools. Private schools can go to hell. They can give us money, whatever. But um, public schools, the games, all of our games are free, just sort of without restriction. And this came about because it actually wasn't a school, but it was like an after-school program in the UK. They've like the way that they're like the computing priorities work in the UK is different from here, like in schools, and it seems like they're a lot more like generally about computing, um, than like STEM or some vague kind of like they're really just about like computers and computer skills, and so programming games align pretty nicely with that. And so like this guy contacted me and he's just like, hey, I want to buy some of your like one of your games for like our computers. We run this computer lab for kids after school to like get them excited about computers, and it's kind of like a daycare like community building thing too. And I was just like, I'm like, what? Like he was only asking for like one game, and it's just like, this person would probably like all of our games because it's better than one game, a bunch of games. And so I asked him just like, like if money wasn't an option, like would you be asking for more games, or like what if we were to take your money, like what would it not be going towards? And the answer was like humans, paying humans to be there and like give attention to the children and teach them things. And that was when it sort of occurred to me. It's just like, okay, so when we sell our games to schools, we're sort of like denying them other things that admittedly other people could also be giving, but they're not. And so it just sort of seems it's like, we don't even make that much money from schools because they're the worst customers. They have no money and they're trying to buy huge amounts of software, and it's like really hard to make money off of them. And like maybe it was also kind of like I don't want to say immoral, but like
Mm-hmm.
morally unnecessary for us to be taking their money, because like there really is like they're making opportunity costs. They could be, if money weren't a thing, they could be getting more of other stuff and they could be getting more of our games, and they would be strictly better off if we weren't charging. And so that was when it occurred to me. I'm just like, let's just give away our games to schools. And this is sort of like, this is the thing I've sort of been dabbling with more, as somebody who makes stuff, is like, how can I keep doing this and not have to go back to working at Microsoft, but lean harder into sort of like anti-capitalist kind of
Mm-hmm.
ways of doing things. I read this really great interview, probably like 2 years ago now, but it was about this guy. He runs a lab in Canada. He's a doctor, and they 3D print. Design like 3D printable medical equipment for like, I think it was in like Lebanon, somewhere. It was somewhere in like that area. And he designs 3D printed medical equipment, and he's like a doctor. Like he's a doctor. He went there. He's like, he said in the interview, he's like, I'm stupid. I have to see things for myself to really get it. So like he went there and like got shot in the leg while trying to like provide medical care to people, and he he got to see it all firsthand. And he had this idea where they designed, like, I think one of their big things was designing like a stethoscope. Like stethoscopes are pretty simple, but they have to be like kind of precise in how they work, and they cost like hundreds of dollars. And they designed one that's like $5 that can be 3D printed. And and they were sort of asking about like his motivation for doing this, and like one of the things is that like these are places in the world where like they're starting to advertise like Coca-Cola. They know that like within like the next decade or whatever, these areas are going to be like brought further into like the monoculture, and have like their resource. They're going to become markets for things. And his idea was to sort of get in there and give away like his stuff for free or cheap, as like to kind of like before like the big medical supplies companies come in and convince all the doctors that they need to be like buying like hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth, like $100 stethoscopes or whatever, like to get in there and show them, they're like, hey, here's the cheap version. This is just as good. Like, and sort of get in there and like get there before capitalism gets there, basically. And I it just, it seemed really cool, right? Like they did like, oh yeah, like we can build these alternative structures just now, like, and experiment with alternatives. And just experiment with things, and I thought that was really inspiring. And like obviously I still like, I want to have a job, I like having this be my job, but just sort of, it seems like a good way to kind of dip my toes into it, and it's been a success, I guess. Like we've not taken lots of money from people, so
There
I think that's
go.
good. I think it's like if you were to naively total up all the amounts of, I can check really quickly, if you were to naively total up all the costs of all the game licenses we've gave out in the past 2 years, it's $420,000. So they would have never given us that much money, but we can pretend that's how much value we've given people.
Let's see. Question came up about kind of like the physical items, and that actually is a good lead into this next little fun question I want to ask you, and then we'll get to 10Dot's question. But of all like the like written manuals and like physical stuff you've made, any that's like your particular favorite that you design or written up?
The Exapunks zines are by far the coolest, because they're functional and they're like little hacking zines, and there's 2 of them, which is like way cooler than there just being one of them. I'm a huge fan. I really like that. It's I mean, Exapunks as a whole was really like personal to me, right? Like it is a game about what I wanted to be when I grew up, which was a cool hackers, like a hacker like in the movie Hackers,
Yeah.
and like in 2600. And that's not really what I was good at, but it was really, I don't know, I'm just really satisfied. Like I was just thinking back to it this morning, just like, yeah, I made Exapunks. That was good. It's just, I don't know. It was a kind of like self-actualization that I still really enjoy having done. Like Opus Magnum, our most successful game, it doesn't really mean that much to me. It was just a game, it's kind of, it takes place in a fantasy world, whatever, like it was successful. It made us much money, but it's just, it's whatever. Right. But Exapunks is like my entire aspirations of my childhood rolled into a game that other people can play. And that is way more, the egocentric part of me really appreciates that. And the zines are just so cool. And the fact that you can get them on Lulu, like you can still buy, we ran out like years ago, but you can still buy print on demand ones on Lulu, and they look really good. And you can play this game and have these cool hacking zines. I love it. Everybody makes physical stuff nowadays, like for their games, but it doesn't do anything, right? And that's just garbage. That's just future trash, right? And I love the Exapunk zines and like our other written stuff. I mean, the binders you can't get anymore, but those are really fun for Shinjin.io because like they're functional, right? Yeah. Like it's a book that comes to life.
There you go.
I think that's really cool. But that said, we are going to be selling trash soon in the form of the NES version of Hackmatch, which is really, admittedly, it's actually really fun to play it on the real hardware. I borrowed my friend's NES, and it's at least like 3 or 4 times as fun to play it on a real NES and a real CRT than it is to play it as like a ROM on an emulator on a flat screen. So I shouldn't say the trash. People love buying my trash, and I'm more than happy to sell it to you. But I do feel a little guilty. We were talking about like being complicit in things. It does feel a little bad sometimes to be like, let's manufacture some future trash and sell it to people. I can put my name on it if it sweetens the deal. So we will be selling the NES ROM, but it also comes with like the source code. Like it seems stupid to sell like a weird kind of fake video game, but it comes with the source code. It comes with our C compiler that we wrote for the NES. It's a whole package of. It's not merely the ROM. It's you're going to learn all about the NES development process and like you can see all the weird software we wrote and stuff like that. And that's how I justify like it's more than just selling a ROM, which I feel like is ridiculous. So.
And then Tendai asks, you used to have a Thingsverse account with some things like a Space Chem badge, inventory
Oh
block,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
others. Yeah.
I turned it into my personal Thingiverse account. Let me drop it in chat really quickly.
All
Oh,
right.
I don't know if I can drop it in chat.
Yeah, YouTube may
Um,
not. If you want to put it in the Discord chat, I'll try and post it from my side and see
yeah.
if that
Let
will get a
me
stick.
drop it. Yeah, I hadn't really touched my Thingiverse account. So I have two 3D printers. I really love 3D printing. It's super cool. Like I'd want to make a game about 3D printing, but there's no point. Just get a 3D printer. It's better than the Zachtronics game about 3D printing. I have two Ender 3 Pros. They're great. Like right out of the box, they will print very nicely. And so I had made a couple things for our old 3D printer that we got for Zachtronics, and then I hadn't really uploaded anything, but I did a bunch of stuff on my own. So I turned the Zachtronics account into my own personal account because there's like some weird stuff that's not really Zachtronics appropriate, like a Magikarp tissue dispenser that I made. Like we can't really have like a Pokemon thing with with Zachtronics on it. But yeah, there's like a Trash World license plate. I have an Exapunks themed vanity license plate that was because I said I love Exapunks, and so I have a vanity plate, and so I made myself a Trash World News license plate frame to go with it, which is very cool. I printed out a bunch of tiny computers that this guy designed, and like I made a couple more to add to my collection. So that's on there. 3D printing is really fun. It's definitely exciting.
Nice. Another question came in, or I think this was more of a comment from Will, but I think it's an interesting one. Most puzzle games seem to treat the why of what you're doing as an afterthought. Is there a reason why puzzles, narratives, and experience can't be more seamlessly blended together?
I mean, I'd argue they can be, and that's something that we usually strive for,
Yeah.
right? All of our puzzle games are, to me, the story. It's important that there's like a plausible story. It varies with the game. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think puzzles are sort of by their nature often abstract. Um, so it's hard, and I think a lot of people. I mean, it's something boat I'm kind of in right now is like I kind of just want to make some puzzles and just focus on the puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, and it is a very tricky because, as we've said, so much of like the puzzle genre that's grown in the last decade has been that integration of a theme and a story to it. Like you said with EXA punks that, or with Exapunks, that it really was designed around this whole story of the hackers kind of future. That I think everyone who saw that movie as a child, I think also wanted to grow up to be in that.
Yeah,
And what we've kind of seen, and I think this is just indicative of games as a whole, is that people expect more out in their games these days. That they don't want to just play, here's 600 platforming levels, just, do them all one after another. Or and I've seen some of those, like, here's 700 screens of puzzles, just doing one after another, and, game over.
yeah. I mean, at the same time, like, what's the story in PUBG, right?
Yeah.
What's those? I mean, even like League of Legends, right? Like I've been playing a little bit of League of Legends with some of my friends lately, and like that game has a story, but it doesn't, right? It's just like a sport, right? So I think a lot of games still don't have stories.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are fine with it. I just think the thing you're saying, like, yeah, it's less like you're less likely to find a game that's just like here's 100 puzzles, and like it's just kind of uninteresting, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
in Mobius Front, it's like here's 30 missions in a row. You know what? That's not very good, right? Like it's not competitive. People want roguelikes and it comes down to structure, right? I think like
Yeah.
structure and scaffolding is an aspect of game design just like any other, and there are trends in it, right? And like I think like FTL, like I don't want to say that FTL was the first, but I think that FTL was definitely like an important game in establishing like, oh, this is how you can scaffold a low budget game, and it'll be much more engaging than if you scaffold it in a sort of traditional level based way.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think all of our games are level based, right? Because a lot of our puzzles and people, I mean, I guess our games aren't that popular, right? Like Factorio is like a much better Zachtronics game because it doesn't have levels, right? But we use the levels for the specifics of our games is that it resets the state and it makes it so that when you do a terrible job in one level, you're not hamstrung by it on the next level.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and like that kind of presentation, I think, has been very key in a lot of the successes that we've seen over the last like 4 or 5 years. Stuff like Slay the Spire, Monster Train,
Yeah.
Hades, you name it.
They're also really compelling from like a psychological perspective. People love making numbers bigger. You know, well, years ago we made educational games. The people we were making them for paid for us to do this workshop that was about how to make compelling games, and they called it like personal something needs satisfaction pens. They had some like psychological whatever behind it, and the three things they identified are uh, progression, what was it? It was like progression, mastery, and relatedness were their things. And so people want to feel like they are getting better, and people want to feel it's autonomy. That's what the progression and mastery are the same. So it's progression, autonomy, or mastery, autonomy, and relatedness. That's what it was. And so mastery, people want to feel like they're getting better at a game, but oftentimes you can just do this by like making them better at the game, like statistically and with progression and stuff. And so like that's a huge psychological thing. It also gives a sense of autonomy because you feel like, you know, in a roguelike kind of thing, like it's not saying here's the level, here's another level, here's another level. Like that's actually really low autonomy, right? When you feel like you're the one taking yourself from level to level because you can't see the edges of them, you know, that's going to check off that autonomy box. And so like obviously these don't really say anything about whether you're playing with other humans, but like of the two of these three things that I agree are actually super important to making a game that is highly compelling and successful, right? Like having this sort of open world structure, you know, it nails two of them. Like open world RPG structure nails two of them, and I think that's why you see it in these successful games, is that it just is a successful pattern.
And as a quick time check for people watching, we are about an hour and 40 minutes in. I have, I think, just like one or two more like general design questions for you, Zach. So I think for my time, probably another 20, 25 minutes, if that works for you.
Yeah, it's starting to lose steam, but I can do that.
Okay. And for chat, I think this will be kind of a last call for any questions. Because once I'm done with mine, I think we'll wrap things up unless anything else comes in. But again, I think this has been a really solid chat, and thanks again, Zach, for coming on. And we have a whole lot of people on who are definitely fans, not just of Ironclad and Mobius, but of all your games. Let's see. A comment or a question from Namleets asked, do you think a lot about what you don't like about most games when you design a game?
Nope, because I don't play games anymore, so I wouldn't know what I don't like about them.
Well, there you go. It's a secret. Just don't play video games and design. You can just ignore that part.
Well, I wouldn't argue that our games are getting more successful. If anything, our curve is taking a hard dive if you look at our last 4 games, but that's okay. You can pretty much plot a line from the top to the bottom.
And I guess, speaking about that for us, and I guess one of the things I always find very interesting when I talk to developers is like asking them about, you know, when the dust settles on some of their games. Like you said earlier with the Scribblenauts example of him saying, you know, why is it a successful game? I guess my question is, like, have you ever thought about, like, if you could redesign one of your games, like, would you do that? Or is it, like, such a case of it's so intrinsically you, like, you can't imagine, like, another version of this game?
I don't really think in terms of that. I mean, the excitement for me of making a new game is making a new game. So this is why we don't do any sequels. I think a lot of times it is kind of just like I just can't even. I don't know. It's like if we were to make another sequel, like Space Chem, for instance, I could think of things I would change, but I don't think they would even be the right things to change, and I don't want to make another Space Chem. So I can't even imagine like what it would be like to fix Space Chem, because like I don't want to work on Space Chem like that. I'm not interested. We had thought for a while like, oh, you know, it's been 10 years, maybe we should like that's kind of actually what Opus Magnum was meant to be, was like more of like a new Space Chem. And it's just like, oh, I don't care about Space Chem at all. Like, I'm done with that. That ship has sailed. So, yeah, like, I just can't even, like, there's not really an answer to that question, because it's like, just the idea of going back to revisit an old game just seems so foreign. Like, why would I? there's a whole like infinite, like there's about 10 games that I could go back and tweak, or there's infinite games I could make that are new. Right? Like there's just no need to go back.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and like that push and pull, I think, has always been a very tricky conversation for a lot of indie developers. Do I take what I made and make another one of those? Do I just, go completely off the left field and make whatever the heck I want? And it's hard for a lot of developers to make that choice. Because, like we said, like, game dev is very mysterious. It's hard to know whether or not your next game is going to do well or nobody's going to play it.
Yeah.
Let's see. 10.s, ever think about making your games compatible to more programming-driven devices like the Raspberry Pi?
No. I feel like we a long time ago ported SpaceChem to Android and iOS. Did it at about the same time. Hardware was pretty similar. Our sales on iOS were easily 10 times that on Android. And I've always chalked it up to the fact that people who like spending money buy iPads. People who don't like spending money and want to try avoid spending it at all costs, that's the only reason why you'd buy an Android tablet. And this is more complicated now because iOS and Android mean different things, but it used to be that Android was like worse than iOS. And so so like of course that the people who barely want to buy hardware definitely don't want to buy software, and I suspect that the people who want to buy a Raspberry Pi instead of a computer, they don't want to buy our games. Like that's not a real thing. Hypothetically, you can make an argument that would be good for schools, because I think in some schools they use like Raspberry Pis for like student experimenting computers, but I mean, that's not really, again, not going to make money there. So this is true with a lot of our stuff, right? Like, why don't we do more with like our DRM free versions of our games? Like, why do people always ask, like, how come our GOG versions of the GOG versions of our games don't even support achievements? And it's like, because the GOG sales are pathetic. We make 99% of our money on Steam. So that's the only thing, that gets 99% of our attention. So it's kind of similar to that. We've tried porting to things that would hypothetically make money, like the PlayStation, but it never really goes anywhere.
Let's see. Pedro asks, you ever think about releasing the source code of your games once they stop generating revenue?
Once they stop generating revenue, maybe. What do you think's keeping our studio afloat? Certainly not Mobius Front. So... this is something that I'm mindful of. There are other people with the keys to the games in the event that I'm hit by a bus. And if that doesn't happen, I'll be in charge of our games. And at some point, if people still care and I can't keep supporting them, that is a thing I would consider doing. We've already done like kind of dipped our toes into that a little bit. Like SpaceChem is actually maintained by two super hardcore SpaceChem fans. So they have source code access. They have like a relationship with us, and they maintain SpaceChem for us. But it's still closed source because like having it be open source I don't think really benefits anybody. None of us really want to have to deal with like accepting like pull requests from random people. These are two people who are very active in the SpaceChem community, and like they kind of run the game now. And I wasn't expecting to get into this relationship with them, but it happened, and I'm really glad we did, because it really works out. It's especially because SpaceChem's like SpaceChem is so janky. There was a lot of improvements they could make that were very like low hanging fruit, and and I think that's like a really great model. In a sort of panic after the Infiniminer code was released, I open sourced it, and it was just like, no, this is not really an effective way to run a game. Like we kind of need it to be more centralized and have a little bit more like discussion and control over what happens with it. I think there's a difference between like open source games and open source like document editing programs. That like there's the way you run a project like that is a little different, and I don't know. But in the future, maybe we'll see. One thing I want to avoid is being in a situation where like the games are broken and you can't play them, and like that it's just gone forever. Like nobody likes that. I think we're all of an age when people can appreciate like proper archival like treating video games like things that deserve to be archived.
Yeah.
So I'm on board with that for sure.
And me too. That's another like hour-long topic we get on game preservation.
Yeah.
Let's see. Who cares? Ask. Do you have plans for new content for old games?
No. We generally just go forward. Like I said, we make a game a year. We have to kind of stay focused in order to do that. A lot of our games have player content, which kind of keeps them running. Like there's like an Opus Magnum tournament going on right now, and that game came out a couple years ago, and like they're actively making puzzles and advancing the field of alchemy and doing all of that. So that kind of does something like that.
Mm-hmm. I always wonder, like, if like people would like try to speed run any of your games in terms of like trying to come with all the code and the solutions.
Yeah. Infinifactory. There are definitely people who try to speedrun Infinifactory, and like you kind of can. It's weird, but I mean, in all honesty, speedrunning any game is kind of weird, right? So it's hard to be like, oh, Infinifactory, now that's weird. It's like, no, speedrunning as a whole is pretty weird. But Infinifactory is really weird. Like they have to memorize all the solutions that they're going to build. I don't know. But again, like that's what speedrunning is all about, right? Is like, it's hard for me to understand.
Mm-hmm. The most
I get it, but I don't get it.
The most I could speedrun was Cuphead. But yeah, I could not imagine like memorizing all that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Herman asked, how do you decide when to be done putting out updates to a game?
Oh, I don't know. There's just like a feel, right? Like you can kind of, I don't know. I mean, like people's interest falls off, my interest falls off. But then like there's like a sort of sense of like, oh, we have to do a certain amount of stuff. I don't know. It's just like a weird. This is what I kind of like about early access, is that there's this kind of like weird, unclear back and forth about like how much work we should be putting into a game versus how much the players expect and what they would actually benefit from. And like having that early access channel, it sets everybody's expectations such that we do get like information flowing back and forth in a way that's hard to do. Actually, it turns out, without putting that hashtag blue rectangle on it. And so it's just kind of like a weird little dance where we try to figure out what we should do. Like we updated Mobius Front, we added multiplayer, and we added like AI skirmish, and we added a new faction of like the Soviet army. And a good way to know that we're probably done doing updates is when we look back and we're like, yeah, that probably wasn't worth it to do that update, which is kind of the case. I mean, I'm glad we did it. I feel like, it's sort of like the idea of like a baker's dozen, I guess, right? If you give somebody like a 13th roll, like you definitely gave them 12. And I feel like with Mobius Front, like we gave people multiplayer, we gave them a whole nother faction. We definitely gave them enough, I think. I don't feel like we haven't delivered enough on that game.
Let's see. Azerton asked, how do you find enough playtesters for puzzle games, and is it possible for a new game dev?
You release it and you sell it, and then you say early access, and then you collect lots of data using a fancy metrics backend that you write yourself, and which actually doesn't have to be that fancy. And that's how you get enough playtesters. Our ability to playtest our games before launch has always been really bad because it's just hard to find people. It's especially hard to find people who can play like a Zachtronic style puzzle game. So releasing a game has always been our best way to get playtest data. But we have like a small community of people that I've sort of pulled from somebody created a Discord for our games like years ago, and I sort of have selected some people from that, and I go to them when we have a new game that I need tested. But mostly releasing it, honestly. Yeah, I like Mobius Front. Like the people that we picked because they were good at Opus Magnum and liked Opus Magnum. Not exactly the right group of people you want to playtest Mobius Front, but like they did a little bit, and then we played it a little bit, and we did some in-office playtests with friends. And at some point, we're just like, yeah, we're not really learning anything new from playtests. We just have to like move on to the next step, which is to release it. Yeah, I'll send a link to the Discord. It's unofficial, so I am not responsible for what goes on there. But they really like Zachtronics games there. So I just Discord just switched back to it. Yeah, there you go. That's the link to that. They've even got a channel for Mobius Front.
This was the unofficial one, 10 dot.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess one of my final design questions I want to ask you, I think this is something that I asked you, I think, way back in one of our first interviews, but with the audience here, I kind of want to get your thoughts, like, for them to hear as well. And that has to do with difficulty. Again, like, your games have always been on the higher difficulty side, especially in terms of complexity and trying to learn them. And what I want to ask you is, how do you, I guess, settle on what's an easy version of one of your puzzles? What's the hard version? Like, how do you kind of structure your games in terms of, like, difficulty in that aspect?
Oh, it's just sort of like within the game, right? Like it's regardless of how hard Shenzhen IO is. I think okay, so I think there we can talk about difficulty, but that doesn't mean anything, right? It just like what it like like a game can be difficult because you're like an RP, you're playing like an MMO and you're in the wrong zone, and so the numbers are too big, right? And that's completely different from playing like a fighting game where like you just don't have like the skills to play it, or a game where you lack the knowledge, or like is gambling difficult? Yeah, you lose a lot, but like is that difficulty, right? And so there's a lot of different kinds of difficulty, and like you could try to create like a taxonomy of different kinds of difficulty, and some people have, and we've tried to do that with ourselves, and we talk about stuff like that way sometimes. But like difficulty is it's just sort of like it's a very, very big word. It's like fun, right? It's almost useless with how broad it is. One thing that we pay a lot of attention to is scaffolding, which is specifically having content arranged in a way that as you go through it, your skills will like you'll pick up skills sort of in isolation, and you'll be able to carry them forward and use them on future things. And so scaffolding is something we pay a lot of attention to. Like, I don't know how hard our games are. I don't know why people aren't able to play them. Kind of don't care, right? As long as enough people play them that we don't go out of business, like that's fine. One thing we do pay a lot of attention to is scaffolding and making sure that within a game, if you're the kind of person who could play this game, you're going to get things in the right order, and it's going to kind of ramp up, appropriately. And we have charts that we look at with metrics. We see like we collect data about how many people like start up a puzzle and then rage quit and never come back to the game, and that's like our primary metric of how hard a puzzle is. And we make sure that that rate is sort of constant across the whole game, and that there's not just like a spike where this is the puzzle that kicked everybody out. So stuff like that. But that's like a very indirect way to approach difficulty.
Yeah. And again, I think, as you said, like scaffolding and presentation are so very underrated, I think, for a lot of games, especially if you're doing something different or unique from anybody else. And it really gets, I think, at the heart of, and I think it really gets at the heart of like what separates certain games from really blowing up. Because if your game is completely unapproachable, it doesn't matter if it's the most unique game ever made, nobody's going to want to play it. And
the flip side is true too, though. If your game is really sexy, then even if it's kind of unapproachable, people will play it anyway, right? Like arguably, like Minecraft had like a terrible way of telegraphing like what you could do in it, and that just became part of the appeal, and that people like didn't care, and people just like created a wiki that just tells you how to do everything, right? I think the number of games that have to have wikis that tell you how to do it is like kind of a sign that like this is definitely a thing. There's also the thing that when you're making like the first game in a genre, like you don't have the benefit of everybody already knowing how to play that kind of game. So this is why I just kind of ignore all of this stuff. Like we're off on our own. Who cares?
All right. I think I am just about out of questions, and I guess for chat, anything you want to throw us like incredibly last minute. And while we wait for that, anything that we didn't touch on, whether on Mobius Front, Shenzhen, Exapunks, or anything you're working on that you'd like to talk about?
So we released Nerds Online, which is a free multiplayer solitaire game. I encourage everybody to check it out because unlike our other games, it is free and it is actually fun to play. And it's kind of fun to watch. Like all it took was us making a game free to have it have like a vibrant little multiplayer community. And there's no chatting in the game, so you don't have to deal with people saying weird things to you on the internet. You just play solitaire against them, in this weird game that's kind of competitive but kind of collaborative, and kind of frantic. So it's yeah, I don't know. It's fun. You should go check it out. You have no excuse because it's free. I've heard some people say it's the next Among Us, which is definitely not true, but it's a nice sentiment. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, Zachtronic is free too, I guess. But those are all like weird bad games. Those games are free because they're free because they're bad, as opposed to Nerds Online, which is free because I don't think people would buy it if we charged for it. There is matchmaking for Nerds Online. I added that on this previous weekend, so you can now play games with strangers who are very far away from you, and it's very laggy. But it's not all that bad. I played them all. I jumped in it's fun to just jump in random games, and it's like I don't know how many of these people know my handle. And so just to jump in and play, and I actually had a very low latency game last night, which pleased me. So
Nice. I should try that one too. Maybe we can do that for one of our multiplayer nights so we can get people on for that.
yeah, it's great.
All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. We hit a whole lot of topics, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
All right. But again, Zach, it was a pleasure catching up with you today. And if you're free in the future, come back on. We can have another rant about design and making successful games. Let me know.
Yep. We can do something of that sort. And if you are interested in the Kickstarter of the NES version of Hackmatch, you should follow us on Twitter or sign up for our mailing list on our website, because I do not have any other way to contact people. Although I suspect everybody here is here because they saw me tweet about it on Twitter. So I think most of these people are probably going to see about the Kickstarter. But we're going to start that soon. We just finished designing the box. It looks beautiful. Very excited.
That's a good question, Shark. Do you have anything to say about Fortnite, Zach? Have you even played it?
I played it once and it was terrible.
Well,
I was in a small group with two adults who were very profane, and one like 8-year-old child who had like a 4-year-old babbling in the background, and it was just like a crazy, awful game, and it was terrible. And I was never again. I hate Fortnite.
There's the Fortnite quote. It's a crazy, horrible game. Somebody get that.
Even me saying it's crazy sounds like I'm saying I think it's interesting. No. I do not like. I don't really care for PUBG, but Fortnite just seems strictly worse. It seems like something that only worked because it was free, much like Nerds Online.
Maybe Nerds Online could be the next Fortnite.
Probably not, I would guess, but we can all hope.
Yeah, I have another developer we do the roundtables with that. He also hates Fortnite. We've been joking about doing like the anti-Fortnite cast.
I don't even know enough about it, but like the building, like why can you build stairs? Like I know why you can build stairs, which was that they made a game about building stairs that people didn't like, and so they pivoted into a game that was just a copy of. No, I shouldn't even do this. I don't need to have an opinion about this. You're trying to trick me into ranting about Fortnite. And no, I refuse. I have no opinions about Fortnite whatsoever.
Yeah, Zach's camera is a little bit on the older side. I had trouble like trying to get it properly framed. For once on these casts, my camera is the newer one. Usually I have the very old as jank camera.
I'm not out of frame. I'm centered in the middle of my picture. What's going on? I'm right here. Here's the edge of the frame, right here in the center. Yep.
We need more rants. I know.
Hold on, let me check the live feed. Oh yeah, you put me in a tiny little box.
Oh, I have to fit you in on my little box. You can blame Shark on that one. He's the one who designed the overlay.
Oh yeah, I could just move back, and then that would be better, maybe.
A little bit.
Yep. Nope. This is nope.
A little bit.
There's like a 2-second lag. That's pretty hard. Anyway, yep. Okay. Yep.
But it's been great hanging out with you, and like I said, like it was a lot of fun, like just like catching up, especially having more of these design talks. Yeah, it's going to the end of the stream, of course. That's how things work around here. But yeah, if you have any social media you would like to plug, you mentioned Twitter. Feel free to mention
Yeah.
that or type it
We're
out
on
in the note.
Twitter at Zachtronics.
There we go.
Yeah.
But I think that will do it for this cast. So yeah, good luck with the Kickstarter.
Yeah. I whatever. I mean, it's an NES game, right? Like, it's not even about making money at this point. It's just a bizarre publicity stunt.
There we
The
go.
desperate way of saying, "Please look at me."
But definitely have a great rest of your night, Zach. And like I said, if you are free in the future, just give me a buzz, and we can certainly have another chat.
Yeah, definitely. It was great being on. Thanks.
All right. And for those of you watching this live recorded, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are new, be sure to do all that liking and subscribing people keep telling me to mention on all my YouTube videos. We have our own Discord channel. That is the official Game Wisdom one. That will be in the description down below. If you're watching this recorded, there should be links to Zach's works and Twitter and all that as well in the description. If you are a developer working on a game and would like to come on and talk about it, I am always looking for a guest, so feel free to reach out and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.